If reality's sucky and it doesn't feel good, and the ability to intentionally stay instead of saying, oh, well, hey, it's not so bad. And maybe even just like mind effing yourself to try to get through it. If that helps you stay, that's one thing. But if you say it in order to move out of it into almost a delusional reality, a reality that isn't even what's going on, that's not helpful. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Simply Human podcast. I'm Christina Caro, clinical psychologist.
And I'm Karen Linsky, a leadership and self-trust coach.
Last week, we did an episode on a general overview of the coping strategy of avoidance. So today we're going to do a bit more of a deep dive and focus in specifically on avoiding difficult emotions. If you listened last week, we talked about how avoidance is a self-reinforcing strategy in that when you avoid something that feels uncomfortable, you stop feeling uncomfortable. But the consequence is that it makes your life smaller and smaller. Today, we want to introduce a model that comes from acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a type of psychotherapy that combines cognitive behavioral therapy and Buddhist psychology or mindfulness-based therapy. And there's a model called the choice point, and we're going to be using that to help give you a tool that you can use when you find yourself in that moment of difficult emotions.
But before we start, we want you to consider giving us a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel, because those small steps can really help us reach more people with this information.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. We really appreciate that. Now, we have all had experiences of the discomfort of difficult emotions, right? Something happens and we feel rejection. By the way, if you have ADHD, you probably feel familiar with this. There's something called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. It's just awful feeling inside your body of rejection. We have a difficult feeling when there's criticism, or there may be anxiety with uncertainty, or we feel loss or grief or fear. So these are all types of difficult emotions, and some of them are a little more challenging than others. For example, shame is one that has a really strong tendency to cause us to want to hide or to avoid. And in our culture, grief is another one that people do tend to avoid. So when we have this difficult emotion, there is this urge to avoid, and we feel it like we want to run away and hide. We don't want to be seen. We shut ourselves away in our office, or we stop responding to our friends who are trying to reach out. We go into our cave. This is what a version of avoidance might look like behaviorally, is that we want to hide. We don't want to be seen because we have this uncomfortable feeling inside of ourselves.
What makes certain emotions feel more threatening than others? That's my first question. And then the second question is, how do we know when we're just being triggered versus just experiencing normal discomfort?
The first question, why do some emotions feel more threatening than others? Yeah, we've touched on this a little bit in the past, that we have hardwired in our brain certain sensitivities about the threat of being thrown out of the cave, because we're social beings and we have a dependencies on being in social connection for our survival. So that's why, for example, shame is a more difficult experience, because it's that feeling of I am wrong, I am unworthy, or, I don't even belong in the cave. Feelings like that will feel more threatening, like it actually threatens my safety in whatever the social group is that I feel the need to be connected to. And then your second question, how do we know when we're being triggered versus experiencing normal discomfort? Think about triggering. When we're triggered, that's when this lizard part of our brain, the one that is afraid that we're going to be thrown out of the cave, it takes over, and we call that limbic hijack because
Mm.
we say the lizard brain. I don't even know, Karen, why we say lizard, because it's kind of like cold-blooded organism versus mammals, which are warm-blooded. But, whatever. It's called the limbic system. It's where our amygdala, and that's the sort of the seat of our emotions. And it's when it takes over for our survival and kicks in that fight, flight, freeze response. And the part of us that can think and process what's happening becomes hypoactive. It actually
Mm.
starts to shut down so we don't think as clearly because we are purely in survival mode. Whereas normal discomfort, we're going to feel possibly some tension, a physiological response in our body, but you notice that you can still think, like your brain's still working. So that means you haven't gone into sympathetic arousal. You haven't got into fight flight. That's really the difference. It's when you're in fight flight and you're triggered, you're really moving out of thinking into survival. And when you're in just discomfort, you're actually still aware that you're uncomfortable, but
Mm.
there's this window where you can still think about what's actually happening.
So, why does it matter if we choose to avoid even minor discomforts that we could actually handle?
Well, the problem is that people are habitually choosing to move away from even manageable discomfort. It's like our tolerance is shrinking on our
Mm.
ability to just deal with those manageable discomforts. And when we are choosing to move away, we actually move farther from our authentic selves. And there ends up being more discomfort and more consequences like anxiety, depression, and isolation when we start doing this habitually. And then actually, numbing is another adverse consequence of people who are regularly like going into avoiding discomfort, even discomfort they could probably handle to become more resilient. They're just going into these habits of going onto their phones and scrolling and kind of numbing out on TV and things like that. So the problem is that people are habitually choosing to avoid manageable discomfort. And as a consequence, they're shrinking their tolerance and moving
Mm.
further and further away from being authentic, being their authentic selves. So think about it. Think about a time when you chose to avoid uncomfortable emotions and use distraction or numbing or blame shifting. Like, did you feel good about yourself afterwards?
Man, you are like naming me what I used to be a few years ago because I think avoidance was such a big strategy that I used. And I did all of them, like distraction, making impulsive purchases when I really felt inadequate or empty, right?
Mm.
Or binging watching, like you mentioned, to avoid processing some big problem, or even emotional eating, right, to help manage my
Oh,
stress, which was really good for me.
right,
That's
right.
all about distraction of emotions.
Well, and would you say that you felt good about yourself when you were doing all that?
And of course, I never felt good after. And that's when I started to realize, asked what's going on, and then experiencing difficult emotions better.
So, when you were in that habit of avoiding a few years ago, did you feel that those choices to avoid, did that contribute to actually feeling confident in dealing with the next time you had a difficult emotion by actually confronting it?
No, no, it did not.
Right. Right. Because it's just like anything. If we are not practicing something, then next time it comes, it's not any easier. So you can see when you said what is the problem with habitually choosing to avoid? It's that we don't gain confidence
Mhm.
in being able to actually confront or stick with or explore a difficult emotion because we're not practicing being present to it. And usually when we engage in those avoidance behaviors, especially if it's like numbing or binge eating or maybe blame shifting, we feel bad afterwards. Like we realize like, oh my God, I just ate a whole pint of ice cream. Like what was I doing? or I didn't pay attention to my kids because I was really stressed out from work and I just went on my phone compulsively. And meanwhile, because I have some clients who are like, oh my God, I did this. I'm such a terrible mom. They don't feel good about themselves
Yep,
afterwards.
yep.
So when we're doing this habitually, that means we're also setting ourselves up habitually to feel worse about ourselves, right?
So
So
what's the
I
alternative?
well, what we talked about last time in our general overview of the antidote to avoidance is staying, learning to build the
Mm,
resilience to
mhm,
stay in the discomfort. And so that's where we're going to be introducing this model called the choice point, because I want you to think about that moment of discomfort. That is the moment of choice. You can avoid or you can move towards the something else, something that can help you deal with the discomfort. And I'm going to put a link to a short educational video by Russ Harris, and it's called The Choice Point. And that way you can just watch that video and it'll go into more detail about it. I am going to talk about the model later, but just for now, you have the choice of moving away from the difficult experience, and that's usually numbing, projecting, distracting, perfectionism, people pleasing, all kinds of behaviors to get out of that discomfort. Or the other choice
mhm.
is we move towards the values that can help us ground and help give us direction on making a choice that moves us more towards the person that we really want to be. When we
Mm.
align with our values and then can take a committed action that aligns with that value, it's going to be reflecting the best version of ourselves despite the discomfort.
So what makes that away move so immediately appealing?
I think it's related to that innate fight flight.
Hmm.
So most people are flight. So we want to run away, right? Move away from the discomfort, like saber-tooth tiger, move away. So I do think it's kind of an instinct to move away, but there's other things that contribute. For example, everybody has a different threshold to start with. So I'm on the autistic spectrum. And there are or were certain things that are definitely create more uncomfortable feelings inside of me. So I used to have a lot more discomfort around social interaction, right? Because I don't have the programming to understand social nuances and norms and social communication. So I would just instantly feel uncomfortable. So I did avoid social interactions. And to some extent, I still do, not as much as I used to. But so part of our personality are neurodivergence, cultural conditioning. For example, like I do think that when we have been exposed to this stylized, perfect life, like in social media, it becomes really difficult for people to be more open and honest about their struggles.
Mm,
So they're like, shove that
totally
all
agree.
away. Yeah, my life's perfect. I just like keep that in the down low. So that's really unfortunate. And then it's interesting when I was doing a little bit of research on this, one of the things that came up was weakened social support. So, particularly since the pandemic,
Hmm.
we've heard more about that was very disruptive to social connection. There was more and more coming out about the loneliness epidemic.
Mhm.
And how this plays a role is that social support provides something called borrowed resilience. Like, have you ever noticed this? Like, you feel more confident doing something if you have a buddy with you, you have
Yeah.
somebody with you. Yeah, yeah. So that's because I may like it might be a social situation and I have this just these uncomfortable feelings. But if I go with a friend like with you who loves social stuff, I kind of borrow a little bit from your joy of social interaction, and that might
Mm.
give me the little push to be able to sit with the difficult emotions but choose to go towards the activity instead of just avoiding. So when we just have much more broken social connections and then we have reduced confidence because now we're just handling it alone, and we
Yeah.
might lean more towards avoidance, right? And then that leads to further isolation and then more weakened supports. And then that can end up being this downward spiral.
So how would we build our tolerance for difficult emotions then?
Well, it's not easy. Like I said, most of us choose a way because We are a bit of creatures who seek comfort. So, one, knowing this
Yeah.
about ourselves, that we seek comfort, that's really important. And that we have this instinct to move away from discomfort. It's a survival strategy. And I've shared in the past on other episodes this wonderful resource by Pema Chodron called Getting
Hmm.
Unstuck. We'll put the link below. And she provides a mindfulness based way to be able to sit with discomfort. And the keys are being present, resisting the urge to react, to engage in away moves, but also bringing a lot of self compassion. So when you're feeling
Hmm.
the discomfort, you would literally acknowledge it's there. You take a breath and you can say, wow, this is really hard. Just sometimes when we acknowledge something's really difficult, just gives us that little bit of time to stay a little bit longer.
I love it too when you put your hand on your heart and you say it out loud. So I think saying out
Yeah.
loud is part of it too, right? It's not just saying in your mind, but actually saying it out loud and hearing yourself say it kind of makes it. That's kind of cool. So something
Yeah.
to think for me is, how do you know the difference between staying with it, with the difficult emotion, versus wallowing in it, right? Because people, I think, don't want to see them as wallowing. Like, I don't want to
Right.
see myself as wallowing, right? But I know I tend to do that sometimes. So, okay.
A way to think about it is staying is active. It
Mm,
actually takes energy to not go into the instinctive flight, the instinctive move towards comfort, the
mm,
instinct to go away from whatever feels bad. So we actually have to put some energy into not doing that to stay. So it's active, it's intentional. Like I'm intentionally deciding to be with the reality that is, as opposed to numbing it. Like oh, like this is really sucky. If reality is sucky and it doesn't feel good, and the ability to intentionally stay instead of saying, oh, well, hey, it's not so bad. And maybe even just like mind effing yourself to try to get through it. If that helps you stay, that's one thing. But if you say it in order to move out of it into almost a delusional reality, a reality that isn't even what's going on, that's not
mm.
helpful. So, in order to stay in reality when it's difficult and creating difficult emotions, we have to have some discipline to do that and bring a lot of that self compassion, like I mentioned, because by staying, we open up the choice, the possibilities. Wallowing, when you think about it, I'm visual, so I picture like a pig in mud, like wallowing.
I love that. I love that visual. I see it now. Right.
Right, and it's
And it
you're
feels
just
good. It feels kind of good until you're like, yeah,
Yeah, and it's passive. You're
yeah,
just
it is.
wallowing in the mud. It's passive. It tends to be more like I'm ruminating. I am looping on the story of the discomfort. Oh, this is terrible. I'm probably the most mistreated employee in the whole building. Like I'm really amplifying my suffering, getting lost in that story. There's no intention besides sitting in my stew and just feeling sorry for myself. And so, because of that, I'm really not opening up possibilities. So, the key is that if you're staying, you're facing reality. And if you're wallowing, you're getting lost in your reaction to reality.
So you use the words about realizing we have a choice. What did you mean by
Well, like I just tried to show with my hands before, but I'm really, some of you, I forgot to describe it for the people who are listening to this in auditory. I'm actually going to throw up onto the screen right now this model of the choice point. And for you, those of you who are listening, if you imagine a circle in the middle of the paper that says the choice point, so that's when we're feeling the discomfort. And then there's like an arrow that goes in one direction, like a V. One goes away, and that's moving away from discomfort or experience avoiding behaviors. So that's the numbing or the projecting. And the
that? Hmm.
other leg of the V, it's more of a Y, I guess. It moves towards. So you start off with some challenging situation. So that's really at the base. And the challenging situation then leads to uncomfortable feelings. And in that moment, you want to bring awareness to the fact, like, okay, this is uncomfortable.
Hmm.
Now, what do? We mostly don't just sit there uncomfortable, like indefinitely. At some point, we're either going to go away, move away, and do some behaviors that maybe are going to be problematic later, or we can try to align with something that moves us towards getting out of the discomfort, but towards something that we can feel good about that aligns with us authentically. And there's a little acronym that goes with this. It's called Be Bold, BOLD. So that's when you're in the moment of the choice point, you breathe, observe, like what's going on? How am I feeling? This is hard. And then lean towards your values. And then as you get grounded in your values, decide on what the action is going to be. So that's the choice point model.
I love that model, Christina. When you showed it to me first, I'm like, wow. I just didn't know the power of the choice because I would always just go up the Y and then because it's so quick. And I love what you did was to slow down and be bold. I love that. I really love that. It's interesting because when I'm coaching my managers and leaders to stay with that discomfort and not avoid, so there's a few things that I also give them. So we just talked a little bit about that mindfulness awareness, taking that moment to put on your heart and say, that's me. And I feel that sadness, just really
Mm.
noticing that emotion as they arise without immediately reacting. You're just acknowledging it. And it's interesting because I always start easy by saying something like, pretend you're using a lotion and just having them just be aware of the pleasant emotion or that emotion that they're having.
Mm.
So self-compassion is another one where I ask them to treat themselves with kindness. And I tell them actually to treat themselves with kindness that you would give to your friend,
Mm.
because typically you don't do that. You give self-criticism. And so that's why I think it's like, think of it as you're a friend that you're giving to. And that gives an easier way to move into that self-compassion. And then the third one, of course, you mentioned earlier with the bold method is to breathe. The ability to breathe is an anchor to stay present. Now, there's another tactile awareness because for some people, breathing doesn't always work. And so there's a tactile awareness I do where you rub your thumb against your third finger in a circular motion and nobody sees you. So when I was coaching one of my clients and we're talking about when she had this emotion, I said, just do that thumb against your third finger in a circular motion. And then just became awareness to the present. That also helps with the
Mm.
mindful awareness. And
Mhm.
so that really helps. So name me some of the other strategies that you actually use with your client. Are there other ones?
Yeah, yeah. There's another thing that Russ Harris, and I'll put this link also to this little video called The Struggle Switch. And it's another mindfulness approach. It's about actually letting the feelings be present without struggling with that, without
Mm,
pushing it away and minimizing or not amplifying it, that wallowing. It's just the discomfort is there. Here it is. Okay. And I just
mm,
keep going on with my life, hopefully towards some value or the way that I want to be in the world, but it's allowing. Now, if it's really intense emotions that we're starting to move into that limbic hijack, we'll do like unclenching for 30 seconds because as the sensations start to get intense, people will unconsciously start to tense their muscles. And
mm,
so I have them use a body scan in some ways, like right in the moment, like try if you're feeling uncomfortable emotions, check in really quick. Are you starting to clench your back, your shoulders, your glutes? And then you do an unclenching exercise. 30 seconds is all it takes to reset back to the parasympathetic rest and digest, tend and befriend
mm.
place where we're no longer in a limbic hijack. And the other thing you can do is you can like orient. It's called orienting. You
Mhm.
just kind of look around the room. It's like, oh, I see a spider web up there. And oh gosh, I forgot to change the calendar date. Basically,
Mm,
what we're doing is by orienting and naming things, we are forcing our prefrontal cortex to come back online because when we're getting closer to that hijack, we're starting to remember get that hypoactivity. Well, if we force ourselves to start thinking through orienting, we can get out of limbic hijack. And then finally, what we always talk about is cultivating curiosity
yeah.
because it's another way to put the demand on the neocortex. So instead of just being lost in the feeling and our brain starting to shut off, we use curiosity. Like, okay, I'm feeling this really uncomfortable feeling. Like, be curious. What happened? What's going on? Why this emotion now? Is there something important I need to register because I'm having a sensation, I'm having a reaction. All of that is thinking. All of that is neocortex activity. And that can help us get out of limbic hijack and help us stay before getting reactive and moving straight into those away moves.
You mentioned about value, and I know I've mentioned before that I really haven't always appreciated or always thought about my values.
Mhm.
And I know that myself, and also as I work with my clients now, when I work with values, we automatically go more towards goals and values. Like
Mhm.
they'll say things like financial security and think that is a value, or to be a good person. But
Mhm.
they're actually goals when you think
Right,
about it.
right, right.
So, how do you actually help your clients understand the difference between values and goals?
That is such a good question because that's a pretty common because I do values work with my clients and I have exactly the same experience as you where they list goals instead. And I'll say, that's a goal, that's a goal, that's a goal. So the way to think about what values are is think of it more as ongoing directions. It's not the destination. So
Mm,
the goal is the destination. So let me give you an example. Say like you gave being a good manager. That's the destination. That's the goal. That's the objective. But the value would say be open and honest communication because that's direction. That's this process I need to do. This is ongoing behavior of being open
mm.
and being honest. And it's more of a practice that leads to the goal. So you can see it's actually giving direction. So now you can see why we use values in the act choice point model to help us give direction towards the goal of being someone who responds in a way that is authentic, that I'm the best version of myself, that this is the type of person I want to be. Those are all the goals. And the values might be okay, be kind in this moment, or be honest, be courageous. Like these are all more the values that give us direction where we want to go.
So, what if someone struggles to identify their values or they feel resistant to the whole concept?
Of values. You know, it's so interesting. I do think that a lot of people struggle with values because it's become either politicized or maybe it's been attached to this assumption it has to do with religious beliefs. And
Oh,
yeah, and it can be associated with external judgment, rather than guidance. So people sometimes shy away surprisingly from that word values. Like I'll honestly sometimes then I'll use ethic, sometimes I'll use principles if people are just
oh,
uncomfortable with the word values. But another way to reframe values is just to say something more like, what matters most to you or what makes you feel most authentic in
mm,
how you're making choices, to act. So we could use the body and emotions as value detectors. For example, say we have a difficult emotion of anger. We can stop when you're able to pause and do that curiosity, like why that emotion now? We might find that it's because something that's happening that's causing that anger is something that's violating our values, and that's an emotional response. So when we stay, that's important information because now we align with our values, like maybe it's fairness or justice or standing up for people.
mm,
Instead of going, "Oh, I don't like anger. I have bad associations with anger. Let me go distract myself."
exactly.
Now I haven't even tuned in to the information that might be saying, "Hey, something in front of you right now is going against your values."
Mm,
Another example is maybe it's the opposite, right? Strong positive emotions. Well, that might be pointing us to something that helps us identify a positive value, something really important to us. So for me, when I go out into the mountains, I go into nature, I have a strong sensation and strong emotions that are really like awe and joy. Well, I could say, God, why am I having that response? And that points to a value on protecting nature. It's like it's just a value of nature. Like I value nature, therefore I want to do things to the goal is to protect it, but the value is nature itself is important. And I know it because whenever I'm in nature, I feel awe, I feel wonder, I feel humble, I feel gratitude and appreciation. So these are all the emotions or strong emotions. They're not emotions I'm going to avoid, but I just wanted to make the point that emotions are information. And when we
mm,
avoid, we lose the ability to actually bring some curiosity to that information. But if we can stay, then we can actually start to really gain some insight. So you want to ask yourself questions like, what is being honored? Or if you're feeling grief, like, okay, what is breaking your heart right now?
Mm.
That might show us to what our deepest pain is, or our deepest values. Or when do you feel most like yourself? When do you feel most authentic? What's going on in this present moment. So having that curiosity about the feelings, that's what can really help us get clarity on what we value.
Wow, I love those questions that you posed. I really love that because those are the ways you try to find out your true values. So, what would you say are the key points about using our values to guide the choices towards courage rather than away from discomfort?
Well, it's remembering the paradox that the away moves often creates more discomfort down the road. Like you were talking about maybe binge eating. Well, down the road, it's like, oh, now I feel bad about myself because I gained this weight. I have clients who engage in numbing with binge eating. It really affects their self esteem. So, away takes us out of the discomfort in the moment, but often has consequences in the long run.
Mm,
Um, Also, values aligned action despite difficult emotions feels more authentic. And over time, that's how we start to build that self respect, self trust, self advocacy, self compassion, and some resilience because we are staying super grounded in our values. Anyway, think about this all as building the muscle to stay. The key is that it is a practice and you will get better at it over time and you will build resilience to those difficult emotions. So every time we choose to move towards our values and take that committed action, we build that authentic confidence in the courage and resilience. And then we move from being reactive to responding because we have the pause and then we're making conscious choices. And we build authentic confidence because when we come from our values and we make the choice that aligns to it, that means we're actually having some boundaries. And when we do that over and over again, we start to believe in ourselves. We build that self trust. And that's what really gives us this authentic confidence in the world.
So, wow, this has been a lot. And I know I knew a lot before because we've discussed this before. And I've learned some new insights that can really help my clients and even myself, and of course, you, the audience. So, I'd like to invite everyone to try these things out in our own life. And here are some practical steps you can try in the coming weeks. So, I want you each to identify one core value by using the questions that Christina was asking earlier. And then I want you to also practice noticing choice points without judgment. And that's the hard one because without judgment is a little bit hard. I know for me, it's really hard. And understand too that this is a journey, guys. Like I'm still on this whole journey about dealing with these, the choice points and the values and going to instead of away. And then I want you to experiment with one staying present strategy.
Yeah, and I like your lotion exercise. I remember when you told me about that. Yeah, I actually did this morning when I was at the gym, and I was like, "Oh, this is Karen's lotion exercise." I actually stopped myself to be more present and more mindful when I put the lotion on. So I appreciated you sharing that one with me in the past. And all I'd have to say is remember, listen, if you're human, you are going to have difficult emotions. It's just
Mhm.
inevitable. But whether or not we engage in behaviors that are avoiding that we are going to feel bad about later, or we choose responding in ways that feel true to ourselves, like that's a choice. And that's
Mm.
what I really want people to get clear because it's empowering when we realize that we have choice. So it does require learning to stay in the discomfort long enough to see that there is a choice in the moment and then practice, practice, practice. It's not about perfection, it's just about committing to the practice.
So we want to thank you all for joining us in our deep dive series on avoidance. So don't forget, please hit the like button, subscribe to this channel so that you know when new episodes drop, and share with friends who could use this message. It not only helps the algorithm, but gives us the encouragement to continue bringing on this type of content to you. Share your experiences using these practices in one area of avoidance. Also, share any questions you might have or future topics of interest in the comments or email us at simplyhuman.connect@gmail.com.
And then until next time, guys, stay curious, stay kind, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, everybody.